It was a hot afternoon, and the railroad carriage next stop was at Temple Cobey, nearly an hour ahead. The occupants on the carriage were three small children, their aunt, and a bachelor who occupied the corner seat on the opposite side. Both the children and the aunt were conversational. Most of the aunt's remarks seemed to begin with "don't," and nearly all of the children's remarks began with "why." The bachelor said nothing out loud. "Come over here and listen to a story," said the aunt. The children moved listently. Evidently, her reputation as a storyteller did not rank high in their estimation. In a low, confidential voice, she began an uninteresting story about a little girl who was good and made friends with everyone on account for her goodness, and was finally saved from a mad bull by numbers of rescuers. "Wouldn't they have saved her if she hadn't been good?" demanded one of the girls. "Well, yes, but I don't think they would have run quite as fast to help her if they didn't like her so much," admitted the aunt lamely. "It's the stupidest story I've ever heard," replied one of the children. "You don't seem to be a successful storyteller," said the bachelor suddenly from his corner. "Perhaps you would like to tell them a story," was the aunt's retort. "Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Bertha, who was extraordinary good," began the bachelor. "She did all that she was told, she was always truthful, kept her clothes clean, learned her lessons perfectly, and was polite in her manners. She was horribly good." There was a wave of reaction in favor for the story. The word horrible in connection with goodness seemed to introduce a ring of truth that was absent from the aunt's tales. "She was so good that she won several medals for goodness that she always wore pinned to her dress. They were large medals, and they clinked against one another as she walked. No other child in town where she lived had so many medals, so everybody knew that she must have been an extra good child. The prince of the country heard about her goodness and allowed her to walk into his beautiful park. No other child was allowed to walk in the park, so it was a great honor for Bertha to be allowed to go there. There were a lot of little pigs running all over the place in the park, but there were no flowers because the pigs have eaten them all. So the prince decided to have pigs and no flowers. There was a murmur of approval of the prince's excellent decision. So many people would have chosen the other way. There were lots of other delightful things in the park. There were ponds with gold and blue and green fish in them, and trees with beautiful parrots that said clever things at a moment's notice, and hummingbirds hummed all the popular tunes of the day. Bertha walked up and down, enjoying herself immensely. If she had not been so extraordinary good, she should have not been allowed to come into this beautiful park. Just then an enormous wolf came prowling into the park to see if she could catch a fat little pig for his supper. The first thing he saw in the park was Bertha. Her dress was so spotless white and clean it could be seen from a great distance. Bertha saw the wolf and saw it was coming towards her, and she began to wish that she had never been allowed to come to the park. She ran as hard as she could, and the wolf came after her. She hid herself in one of the thickest bushes. The wolf came sniffing at the branches, its black tongue rolling out of its mouth and its pale gray eyes glaring with rage. Bertha was terribly frightened and thought to herself, if I had not been so extraordinary good, I should have been safe in the town at this moment. The bushes were so thick that he couldn't catch sight of her, so he thought he might as well go off and catch a little pig instead. As she trembled, the medals for obedience clinked against the medals for good conduct and punctuality. The wolf was just moving away when he heard the sound of the medals clinking and stopped to listen. He dashed into the bushes, his pale gray eyes glaring with ferocity and triumph. He dragged Bertha out and devoured her to the last morsel. All that was left of her were her shoes, bits of clothing, and the 3 medals for goodness. "It is the most beautiful story I have ever heard," replied one of the children with great vehemence. "A most improper story to tell young children. You have undermined the effects of years of careful teaching," said the aunt. At any rate, said the bachelor, I kept them quiet for 10 minutes, which is more than you were able to do. Unhappy woman, he observed to himself. For the next 6 months or so, those children will be assailing her in public with demands for an improper story. Saki uses irony consistently throughout his story. Irony is an existentialist tool that allows us to see reality from a different standpoint than what we would normally view reality as. The biggest ironic theme was how Bertha's goodness was the cause of her ultimate death. If she hadn't been so good, she wouldn't have received the medals and been allowed to go to the park where she was eaten by a wolf because of her medals clinking together. The underlining theme was that goodness doesn't always receive rewards.